First time that New York Fashion Week saw Black excellence in its full glory and splendor.
What fashion?
And after nearly a 2-month trial with 34 witnesses and hours of salacious testimony, a jury of 8 men and 4 women finds Sean Diddy Combs not guilty of racketeering and trafficking, but guilty on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. While Diddy's family celebrated in the courthouse hallways, the rest of the world watched in disbelief as one of the most anticipated verdicts in recent memory delivered. What many are calling a devastating blow to justice, this verdict has shocked legal experts, and what the jury refused to convict him for says more than what they did. The scene outside the Manhattan courthouse told 2 very different stories. Inside, according to NBC News reporters, Diddy's loved ones were seen celebrating the results of what they're calling a partial victory in his legal saga. The Bad Boy Records founder's family stayed stoic as they entered the courthouse on July 2nd, but departed with smiles and waves after hearing the media mogul had been found not guilty on 3 out of 5 counts. Diddy's son, Christian King Combs, told reporters his dad was feeling great about the verdicts, with Diddy reportedly telling his gathered family, "Thank you. Love you." The emotional moment was punctuated by Chance Combs being spotted wiping away tears alongside her grandmother, who gave a thumbs up to the media frenzy outside the courthouse. The judge is currently deciding right now whether Combs will actually be released today, his defense arguing that since the music mogul was acquitted of the most serious crimes, he should be able to go home. Once court was adjourned, family members cheered today's verdict. But while the Combs family celebrated, victim advocates and legal observers expressed outrage at what they're calling a miscarriage of justice. After weeks of graphic testimony, trafficking allegations, and high-profile victims, the jury said no to the most serious charges. The question everyone's asking is why? Some say the jury didn't believe the victims. Others say they just wanted to get home for the 4th of July. The jury found Diddy guilty of shuttling workers across state lines for illegal purposes, but not of trafficking, Cassie. Not of bribery, not of kidnapping, and not of racketeering. The prosecution's entire RICO case collapsed like a house of cards, leaving federal prosecutors scrambling to explain how their slam dunk case turned into a partial acquit. Sean Diddy Combs was convicted on counts 3 and 5, both related to transporting workers across state lines. The jury agreed that he brought these individuals across state boundaries for what they determined were prostitution-related offenses. These were the charges involving what prosecutors called ex-workers, people who were transported interstate as part of what the government claimed was a massive criminal enterprise. But here's the shocker that has legal experts scratching their heads and victims feeling betrayed. The jury completely rejected the charges involving Cassie and Jane. Combs' son Christian telling ABC News how happy he is. "Hey yo, we love y'all. We love everybody watching. So happy coming home. God bless. God bless the whole world." What was going through your head when the verdict was reading the high-profile ALLEGED victims whose stories dominated headlines for months and sparked the entire federal investigation? They didn't see these women as trafficking victims the way prosecutors presented them. Cassie's claims dismissed. Jane's testimony apparently not credible enough for conviction. The failure to convict on these trafficking charges created a domino effect that destroyed the government's biggest weapon. Count 1, the racketeering charge under RICO. This was supposed to be the knockout punch. The charge that could have buried Diddy for decades and dismantled what prosecutors claimed was a criminal organization. Instead, it became the prosecution's most embarrassing defeat. For a RICO conviction, prosecutors needed to prove just 2 underlying criminal acts from 6 possible categories. They had the interstate transportation of workers, which seemed straightforward, but they needed one more predicate act, and that's where everything fell apart in spectacular fashion. Prosecutors showed images of drugs, pills, wire transfers, and extensive financial records. They even claimed there was a systematic drug operation and possible witness tampering spanning years. But the jury wasn't convinced. Or maybe they just didn't want to deal with the complexity of federal racketeering law during a holiday weekend. Kira, no decision quite yet from the judge, just a couple of minutes ago. Though I can tell you we saw the Combs family van pull up to court once again, presumably to hear this decision on whether or not Combs will be released. The deadline that the judge gave both the prosecution and the defense just passed a couple of minutes ago. The prosecution presented what they believed was overwhelming evidence of controlled substances and drug distribution, arguing this could easily serve as the second RICO predicate. The jury specifically asked about the substances during deliberations, which initially gave prosecutors hope they were seriously considering this mountain of evidence. But then came the devastating blow. They ultimately decided this extensive drug evidence didn't meet the legal standard for racketeering. Think about the implications of this decision. Prosecutors laid out alleged evidence of pills, various controlled substances, and what they characterized as a coordinated drug distribution operation spanning multiple states and years. They connected financial records to drug purchases, witness testimony to systematic distribution, and physical evidence to ongoing criminal activity. The jury examined all of this evidence and said, not sufficient for RICO. They also rejected evidence of alleged bribery, including financial payments they claimed were made to silence victims, and by cooperation. They dismissed kidnapping allegations despite testimony about people being held against their will. They ignored witness intimidation claims even with evidence of threatening communications. The drug ring allegations rejected. The supposed criminal enterprise completely shattered in court. Legal expert Christopher Malure, who's been providing analysis for CBS and other major outlets, delivered devastating news about what these convictions actually mean in terms of real prison time. The maximum sentence for the charges Diddy was convicted on is 10 years. But here's the part that will infuriate victims and their supporters. There's no mandatory.
You crazy.
You've been here for
Let's tell me what time we gonna link up, man. We should be over here in a minute.
Around 12 o'clock.
Why are you in the car?
Minimum sentence. Melcher expects Diddy will serve just 3 to 5 years in federal prison. That's it. They were set to turn in their letters at 100 p.m. So, for the last couple of hours, they've been working on their cases. Both sides, up for and against, up his release. The defense wants to see Combs walk out of those golden doors here behind us. They say that because he was acquitted of the more serious charges here, that he should go home. 3 to 5 years for everything the government accused him of doing. Over decades, he'll receive credit for time already served, which significantly reduces his actual remaining time. Plus 54 days of good behavior credit per year against his sentence. This represents a massive victory for Diddy's high-powered defense team and a crushing, humiliating defeat for federal prosecutors who swung for the fences with RICO charges and completely whiffed what could have been a life sentence that would have ended his career and legacy, turned into what essentially amounts to an extended break from his entertainment empire. According to Melcher's professional analysis, this was clearly a compromised verdict caused by holdouts on the more serious charges who refused to convict. His assessment of the prosecution strategy: the government catastrophically overcharged, with RICO confusing the jury and making conviction on the most serious charges nearly impossible to achieve. Here's where this story gets really disturbing and frankly infuriating for anyone who believes in accountability. Legal experts strongly believe some jurors wanted to convict on trafficking and RICO charges, while others absolutely refused to budge from their positions. Rather than stay deadlocked indefinitely and continue deliberating, they found middle ground that let everyone go home happy for the holiday. Everyone except the alleged victims. The timing of this verdict tells the entire story of what went wrong. Deliberations happened right before the 4th of July holiday weekend, one of the biggest vacation periods of the year, and be with his family. But prosecutors have argued that he's a flight risk. And they say that he is still facing 20 years in prison on these lesser charges. They are arguing he should be held until his sentencing. Kira, these jurors had been serving for weeks, dealing with complex evidence, disturbing testimony, and mounting pressure from the court system to reach some kind of decision. They were exhausted. They wanted to get back to their families and barbecues, and they were staring down a long holiday weekend. After weeks of graphic testimony, drug trafficking allegations, and high-profile victims sharing their traumatic experiences, the jury said no to the most serious charges. Legal observers are openly questioning whether these jurors were more interested in fireworks and family gatherings than delivering justice for alleged trafficking victims, who risked everything to come forward. The jury returned verdicts on counts 3 and 5 relatively quickly, suggesting they'd reached early agreement on the worker transportation charges, which were seen as the easiest to prove, but they struggled for much longer on count 1, the racketeering charge, where they seemed genuinely split about whether the extensive evidence met federal standards for organized crime. In a twist that has courtroom observers stunned and prosecutors reportedly furious, the judge announced he's considering letting Diddy out on bail even after his federal conviction. That almost never happens in federal court. Post-conviction bail is extraordinarily rare, especially for charges involving interstate transportation for prostitution. The judge stated he needs time to consider whether Diddy can be granted bail while awaiting sentencing, specifically mentioning he needed to review the statutes and asking attorneys for precedent cases where bail was denied after conviction under the Mann Act. So, Bernardo, if Combs does stay in custody, how much jail time do you expect he would actually serve? So in terms of if the judge does decide that Sean Combs remains in custody pending sentencing, the judge will ultimately determine what his sentence is. You have to think that the sentencing is not going to take place in another week or two. We're talking about months from now that the sentence will take place. $1 million bond is being discussed, which would be pocket change for someone with Diddy's wealth. This is absolutely unprecedented and has legal experts questioning whether celebrity status and wealth are once again trumping standard legal procedures. Federal defendants convicted on similar charges are almost always immediately remanded to custody pending sentencing. The fact that this judge is even considering bail shows how dramatically the jury's partial acquit changed the entire legal landscapes. Diddy could literally walk out the courthouse doors today, smiling and waving to his celebrating family while the alleged victims watch in horror as their abuser goes home to his mansion. He could sleep in his own bed, continue running his business, empire, and maintain his lifestyle while waiting for a sentencing hearing that might only add a few more years to his minimal prison time. During weeks of testimony, federal prosecutors presented what they believed was an ironclad case showing interstate transportation of workers for illegal purposes, extensive controlled substances and drug distribution operations, financial transactions they characterized as systematic bribery to silence victims, detailed allegations of kidnapping and false imprisonment, and extensive claims of witness intimidation and obstruction of justice throughout their investigation. The jury accepted.
I have some very serious news. I've been praying on this and I decided, I know it was
only the interstate transportation evidence involving unnamed workers, finding everything else insufficient to meet federal legal standards. This suggests they either found serious credibility problems with the other evidence or disagreed fundamentally with how prosecutors connected that evidence to specific criminal charges, and in terms of all the time that he's already been in custody, he's going to get credit for that time. So no matter what amount of sentence the judge sentences him to, he'll get credit for about the 9 months that he has been in custody. Yes, he faces a maximum of 10 years on each of those counts. Highly unlikely that this judge is going to max Sean Combs out. Prosecutors had argued extensively that drug distribution alone could serve as a second RICO predicate, emphasizing that federal law required only to proven criminal acts for racketeering conviction. They spent weeks methodically explaining this legal standard and connecting their extensive evidence to these requirements. Believing they had multiple pathways to conviction, the jury's complete rejection of this approach suggests they were either genuinely confused about what constituted sufficient proof for racketeering charges, or they simply didn't accept the prosecution's interpretation of evidence that seemed compelling to legal observers. Diddy's expensive legal team consistently argued throughout the trial that this case didn't meet RICO standards, systematically challenging every piece of evidence and every legal theory prosecutors presented. They argued the government was dramatically overreaching with racketeering charges, trying to criminalize what they characterized as normal, if controversial, entertainment industry business practices. Their strategy of aggressively questioning the RICO charges proved devastatingly effective. With this particular jury, they successfully created enough doubt about whether alleged criminal acts rose to the level of organized racketeering to prevent conviction on the most serious charge that could have destroyed Diddy's life. The defense likely emphasized repeatedly that RICO was designed for traditional organized crime families like the mafia, not entertainment industry business disputes or personal relationships. This framing probably resonated strongly with jurors who were reluctant to treat celebrity business practices and personal conduct as equivalent to organized crime operations. They also successfully challenged the credibility of key witnesses and the interpretation of evidence prosecutors presented as proof of criminal enterprise. Their ability to prevent RICO conviction while not stopping conviction on worker transportation charges demonstrates sophisticated targeted defense work that protected their client from the most serious consequences. We have to talk about this, in addition to talking about his 3 decades as being a pop culture icon. You know, this is a human who has touched every facet of business, of industry. You know, politics, film, TV, music, Broadway, spirits, fashion, you know. But we also now have to talk about this case and the role that plays. The jury's decision to completely acquit on charges involving Cassie and Jane represents, perhaps, the most significant and controversial rejection of the prosecution's case. These were the high-profile alleged victims whose stories had dominated media coverage for months and generated massive public support for the federal investigation. Cassie's case had been seen as particularly strong for prosecutors given her previous civil litigation, public statements, and extensive documentation of her alleged experiences. The jury's rejection of trafficking charges related to her case indicates they viewed her relationship with Diddy completely differently than prosecutors presented it to them. They may have concluded it was a consensual relationship between adults, rather than trafficking, or they may have found significant credibility issues with her testimony that weren't apparent to outside observers following the case. Either way, this acquit undermines much of the public narrative about this case and raises questions about the strength of evidence that seemed convincing in media reports. This verdict sends an absolutely chilling message to other potential victims of powerful figures in entertainment and other industries. If federal prosecutors can't secure a RICO conviction with this level of evidence, resources, media attention, and public support, what realistic hope do other cases have against wealthy, well-connected defendants? The prosecution had everything going for it in this case that other cases can only dream of. Multiple alleged victims willing to testify publicly, extensive financial records and communications evidence, unlimited federal resources, massive public attention and support, and a defendant who had already faced significant public scrutiny and criticism. Yet, they still couldn't convince a jury that this constituted organized racketeering, or that the high-profile alleged victims were credible enough to support trafficking convictions. This outcome will undoubtedly discourage other potential victims from coming forward against powerful figures, knowing that even the strongest possible cases can result in minimal consequences. While Diddy's family celebrated their victory outside the courthouse, the rest of the world grappled with what this verdict really means for justice and accountability. The image of his family smiling, waving, and giving thumbs up to cameras while alleged victims and their supporters watched in devastation perfectly captures the two-tiered justice system that continues to protect wealth and power. So, now we wait for the judge's bail decision. Will the man accused of trafficking, bribery, and racketeering actually walk free today, while others with less power and resources remain locked up for far lesser crimes? The answer may come within hours, and it will tell us everything we need to know about whether justice truly exists for everyone or just for those who can afford the best defense. Money can buy. Money can buy.
Where we rushing to? Why are we rushing? Where we going? Somebody? Wow.
So precious.
Ventura took the stand and testified for nearly a full day about her relationship with Diddy, and I believe that the testimony was more intense, more sensational, and I think more disturbing than I or just about anybody realized it was going to be. And there was a shocking recording played in the courtroom today. I don't know in the courtroom if there was a reaction, but kind of give the context to that. And what the reaction was: presumed innocent until proven guilty. That defendant, of course, Sean Diddy Combs, walked in what may be the most shocking moment yet in the saga of Diddy. CNN has reportedly leaked official courtroom audio, capturing a moment of sheer panic from the hip-hop titan during Day 6 of his explosive trial, as the public reels from the mounting accusations and disturbing testimonies being laid out against the Bad Boy Records founder. This audio leak marks a new and unprecedented twist in an already dramatic court case that is being watched by millions across the globe. Day 6 Diddy trial. I'm going to make this super fast because we have a short lunch break, but Diddy came in this morning, really seemed to be in good spirits, hugged his lawyer, Alexander Shapiro, and Mark Agnall, and they had some discussions about witnesses getting certain testimony struck, and at one point, Mark Agnall said something along the lines of that, this case is becoming based on gossip. He brought up the fact that there is a way chef is expected to testify who was allegedly assaulted, and Agnall says, well, where is this in the indictment? This has nothing to do with racketeering, etc. And the government came back and said, look, the chef is a victim of forced labor. And there was a lot of discussion around this, but I want to give you one little piece of that before we go to Dawn Richard, finishing her direct examination. Now I'm going to make this kind of general, but Dawn Richard, she testified about the Cassie skillet incident with Diddy on the 6th day of Sean Diddy Combs' trial. Cassie Ventura delivered compelling testimony. Detailing the onset of their relationship, she recounted that at 19, after signing with Bad Boy Records, Combs, then 37, introduced her to a lifestyle marked by excessive substance use control. Cassie described being coerced into substance use and subjected to escalating misconduct, including orchestrated intimate encounters with male adultery workers, which Combs allegedly filmed. Before I get into what she has already said, I just want to say that her husband is in the courtroom, and the defense tried to get him removed, saying that they might call him up as a witness later, but the prosecutor pushed back, saying that Cassie is going to need her support system when she's on the stand. They ended up meeting in the middle, saying that he can stay, but he will have to leave once Cassie gets to 2018, where she alleges that Diddy had raped her. Now, throughout Cassie's testimony, it's being said that she was dabbing her eyes, she was emotional, and she was resting her hand on her belly. Obviously, we know Cassie as a 38-year-old pregnant woman, but she described meeting Diddy when she was just 19 years old. She was modeling in New York City, but after meeting, she signed a 10-album deal with his label, Bad Boy Records. She was very honest with her testimony. She talked about the fact that he was this larger than life entrepreneur, and she was a fan of his music. He said she was 21 when Diddy made his first move. She was in Vegas, celebrating her birthday, when Diddy out of nowhere kissed her in the bathroom. She was really confused. She was young, and a new artist, and didn't really know the lay of the land when it came to things like that. She also testified about a 2016 incident where Combs aggressively misconducted her in a hotel lobby, an event corroborated by surveillance footage. Her testimony painted a picture of a prolonged period of manipulation and misconduct beginning from the very start of their association. Yeah, this really was a full day of testimony. It's the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. Cassie came to the stand. She is, of course, pregnant, and she was ready to testify about the full course of her relationship with Diddy. And remember, they were together for 10 years. This was a decade-long relationship, and that will come into play when the defense has an opportunity to cross-examine her and ask her about the terms of that relationship, the whole idea of consent. Yeah, but this was her laying out the narrative in the prosecution's case in chief, and she squarely addresses that beating video in the Intercontinental Hotel in 2016. But even before then, they go back in time and said, when did these really start? And she really painted a picture of the very first, where she says she was 22 years old at this occurred at one of Diddy's homes. She said it was highly directed. There was masquerade masks involved, there were escorts involved, there were at least at 2 sessions in that first, and the session was over when the escort who had been paid for the services was done. The government is accusing Sean Combs of racketeering, sex trafficking, and transportation for the purpose of prostitution, and they painted a picture of how he ran his business and used his employees to conduct all these crimes, including trafficking, kidnapping, arson. The defense, on the other hand, showed a different view of Sean Combs. They admitted that he has a lot of flaws, that he has a really bad temper, that he is guilty of domestic violence and sexual assault. During her testimony, Cassie Ventura recounted instances highlighting Combs' intense jealousy, particularly concerning her interactions with other men. She described how Combs would become enraged over her professional and personal associations, perceiving them as threats to his control. Over her one notable incident involved Combs' reaction to her communication with actor Michael B. Jordan during a filming project in South Africa. Cassie testified that Combs accused her of infidelity and exhibited aggressive behavior, underscoring his possessiveness. At one point, Chris Brown's name was brought up, and it was mentioned in the context of Combs' defense team, saying, "You both would get jealous. And at one point, Diddy got jealous because you were dancing with Chris Brown at some sort of a nightclub or an event, and he took your phone and he wanted to see what